When the gates of Jerusalem opened in the early morning and sunlight poured over its pale stone walls, Israel stood in one of the most prosperous seasons of its history. Trade routes flourished, silver and gold filled the treasuries. Peace rested on the borders. It was the age of Solomon, the son of David, the shepherd king who had once sung to God beneath open skies and later united a divided nation. If David was remembered for his harp and his sword, Solomon would be remembered for his wisdom. Yet the Book of Proverbs does not begin with royal decrees or architectural triumphs. It begins with the voice of a father. Not the echo of a throne room, but the steady counsel of someone who understands that the future of a nation does not depend merely on strong walls or abundant wealth, but on the character of its people. In a kingdom thriving outwardly, Solomon sensed an inward need, the need for wisdom. This book belongs to what is often called wisdom literature. It does not read like a legal code, nor like a chronicle of wars. Instead, it gathers observations from daily life about speech and silence, diligence and laziness, integrity and deception, friendship and temptation. It steps into ordinary streets and homes. It asks quiet but piercing questions. How will you live when no one is watching? What path will you choose when two roads stretch before you? The purpose of Proverbs is practical and deeply human. It seeks to give wisdom and discipline, not merely information, but formation. Wisdom here is the skill of living well. Discipline is the shaping of desires and impulses so they no longer rule the heart. The book invites the reader to understand words of insight, to see beneath the surface of circumstances, to discern what is right when choices are not obvious. It calls people to live righteously, justly, and uprightly. These are not abstract virtues, they are daily commitments. Righteousness speaks of personal integrity. Justice concerns fairness toward others. Uprightness describes a straight path in a crooked world. In a prosperous society, such virtues can quietly erode. Solomon writes as one who knows that moral strength must be cultivated intentionally. Proverbs also extends compassion toward the simple, the inexperienced, the easily influenced. It does not mock them. Instead, it offers prudence, like placing a lamp into uncertain hands. It provides guidance so that inexperience does not become disaster. And yet, the book does not exclude the wise. Even the discerning are invited to grow. Wisdom in this vision is not a destination, but a lifelong pursuit. Then comes the foundational statement, like a cornerstone laid beneath everything else. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. This declaration reshapes the entire conversation. Knowledge does not start with self-confidence or intellectual achievement. It begins with reverence. The fear described here is not terror, but awe, an attitude of deep respect that leads to trust and obedience. It is the recognition that human understanding is limited and that true insight flows from acknowledging a higher authority. To fear the Lord is to live aware of His presence, to align one's choices with His character, and to trust His wisdom above one's own. Without this spiritual foundation, wisdom becomes merely technique. A person may be clever, strategic, even successful, yet still lack the anchor that keeps the soul steady. Skill without reverence can lead to pride. Intelligence without humility can drift toward destruction. So in a flourishing kingdom, amid prosperity and peace, a father raises his voice, not to display brilliance, but to offer inheritance. He points beyond himself, beyond the palace, beyond achievement. and anchors everything in this truth. Wisdom begins with reverence for God. From that foundation, a life can be built that withstands both abundance and adversity. After laying the foundation that wisdom begins with reverence for God, the Father's voice in the Book of Proverbs grows more personal. It is no longer a broad declaration to the nation, but an intimate appeal, "My son." The setting narrows from kingdom to household, from palace to table. These next chapters read like a series of conversations spoken in the quiet of evening, when a father calls his child close, aware that the world beyond the doorway is both full of promise and heavy with danger. The first lesson is urgent: avoid the path of evil. The father begins not with strategy, but with relationship. Listen to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Obedience is presented not as restriction, but as inheritance. Their counsel is described as a garland for the head, a chain to adorn the neck. Images of dignity, not burden. What parents pass down is more than advice. It is sacred legacy, spiritual authority, shaped by experience and reverence. Then the warning sharpens. If sinners entice you, do not consent. The scene becomes vivid. A group of young men whispering promises of quick gain. They speak of easy wealth, of shared spoils, of belonging. "Cast your lot with us," they say. There is excitement in their voices. Violence is treated casually, as if human life were expendable. The temptation is not only money, it is identity, camaraderie, the thrill of power. Sin rarely introduces itself as destruction. It disguises itself as opportunity. But the Father sees what the young cannot. He pulls back the curtain on the end of that road. Those who lie in wait for others ultimately ambush themselves. Their own greed becomes a trap. The very net they spread for victims tightens around their own feet. What begins as profit ends as loss. What begins as boldness ends as ruin. The warning is clear. The path of unjust gain always collects its debt. Life itself is forfeited. The second lesson shifts from the Father's voice to another voice, wisdom herself. She is no longer hidden in a private room. She stands in the public square. She raises her voice at the city gates, the place of commerce and judgment. Wisdom is not secret knowledge for a select few. She calls openly, urgently, passionately. Her appeal reaches the simple, the mocker, the complacent. Yet the tragedy is not that wisdom is silent. It is that people refuse to listen. Some mock, confident in their own insight. Some reject outright, unwilling to surrender independence. Others simply ignore her, postponing reflection for another day. Indifference becomes as dangerous as rebellion. And so wisdom warns, a time will come when consequences cannot be reversed. Calamity will arrive like a storm. Those who laughed will call for help, but the window of response will have closed. The tone is not vindictive, it is sorrowful. Refusal hardens the heart until even desperate cries cannot undo chosen paths. Still, hope remains. Whoever listens to me will dwell secure. Peace is promised, not the absence of hardship, but the absence of fear. Listening to wisdom anchors the soul before the storm ever forms on the horizon. In the third lesson, the Father invites his Son into pursuit. Wisdom is not passively absorbed, it must be sought like treasure. If you receive my words, if you call out for insight, if you search for it as for silver. The language intensifies. This is mining imagery, digging beneath the surface, exerting effort, valuing what is hidden. True understanding demands desire. and yet the source is not human brilliance. For the Lord gives wisdom, reverence leads to revelation. God himself becomes the giver, the shield, the guide. Wisdom guards against corrupt men whose words twist truth. It protects against seductive voices that flatter and promise pleasure detached from covenant faithfulness. The benefits are both moral and practical: safety, discernment, stability. The upright remain in the land, the crooked are cut off. Choices shape destiny. Chapter 3 deepens the call to trust. The father urges his son to inscribe teaching upon his heart, not merely memorize it. Then comes the central exhortation: trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. The temptation to rely on self is subtle. Human insight feels sufficient until it fails. To trust fully means surrendering the illusion of control. This trust becomes tangible. Honor God with your wealth. Acknowledge him in every path. Accept his discipline without resentment. Correction is reframed as love, not rejection. Wisdom, the father insists, is more precious than gold. She is described as a tree of life, an echo of Eden's lost garden, offering restoration and wholeness. Her ways are pleasant, her paths bring peace. Wisdom does not diminish life, she enriches it. Chapter 4 returns to legacy. The father recounts how he once sat as a son before his own father, receiving instruction. Wisdom flows generationally. Above all else, guard your heart. The heart, in Hebrew thought, is the control center of life, the source of thought, desire, and will. Guard it as one guards a city gate. Watch what enters through the eyes. Measure what exits through the mouth. Direct where the feet choose to walk. Small allowances shape long-term direction. Two roads appear again. The path of the righteous grows brighter, like dawn advancing toward full day. The path of the wicked deepens into darkness, where stumbling becomes inevitable. Moral direction determines spiritual visibility. Chapters 5 through 7 confront a particularly potent temptation: sexual immorality. The father does not deny the power of desire. He describes the seductive voice, smooth words, stolen sweetness, secret pleasure, but he refuses to romanticize the outcome. Honor is lost, wealth is drained, regret replaces thrill. What seems private becomes devastatingly public. The warning is intense because the stakes are high, yet the solution is not repression but covenant faithfulness. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. Delight is sanctified within commitment. Satisfaction is found not in novelty, but in loyalty. Fidelity becomes protection, joy, and stability. Then, in Chapter 8, wisdom speaks again, this time with cosmic depth. She declares her presence before creation, beside God as the world was formed. She delights in humanity and offers guidance for rulers and judges. Wisdom is woven into the fabric of reality. To embrace her is to align with the design of existence itself. Whoever finds me finds life. Finally, Chapter 9 presents a dramatic contrast: two banquets. Wisdom builds her house with 7 pillars, complete, sturdy, prepared. Her table is set, her invitation is generous. Come, eat of my bread. Across the way stands folly, loud and seductive. She too invites the simple. Her offer seems harmless. Stolen water tastes sweet. But her guests do not know that. Her house leads downward, into the depths. The Father's lessons culminate in this image: 2 invitations, 2 voices, 2 destinies. The choice cannot be avoided. Every life will sit at one table or the other. And so the Father speaks once more, not with coercion, but with earnest love. Choose wisdom. Choose life. After the vivid invitations of wisdom and folly, the tone of the Book of Proverbs shifts. The long speeches of a father give way to compact sayings, sharp, memorable contrasts that flash like lightning across the sky. Beginning in chapter 10, wisdom is distilled into comparisons: righteous and wicked, wise and foolish, diligent and lazy. Each proverb feels like a window briefly opened, revealing the moral architecture of everyday life. The first contrast touches the most intimate space: family. A wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. In a single sentence, generations are connected. The choices of a child echo into the hearts of parents. Wisdom is not merely personal advancement, it is relational blessing. A son who walks uprightly does not walk alone. He carries honor back into his home. Conversely, folly is never isolated. It wounds those who love most deeply. The proverb invites the reader to see life not as solitary ambition, but as shared consequence. Speech becomes the next battleground. The tongue, small and unnoticed, is described as possessing the power of life and death. Words can nourish like rain or scorch like fire. A gentle answer turns away wrath. Harsh words escalate it. In marketplaces, at gates, in private rooms, speech shapes reality. The wise person measures words carefully, understanding that abundance of talk increases the likelihood of sin. Silence at times becomes an act of strength. The heart overflows through the mouth. Thus, speech reveals character. Work follows speech. Diligence and laziness are placed side by side. The diligent hand leads to wealth, not merely financial gain, but stability and dignity. The lazy drift toward poverty, often through neglect, rather than dramatic failure. The imagery is practical: a slack hand, a harvest missed, a roof that leaks because repairs were postponed. Proverbs dignifies labor. It suggests that faithfulness in small tasks accumulates into lasting provision. Laziness, by contrast, quietly erodes opportunity. Integrity enters the scene with striking clarity. Dishonest scales are an abomination. In ancient markets, a manipulated weight could cheat a buyer subtly yet significantly. The proverb exposes such deception as offensive to God Himself. Justice in trade, fairness in transactions, honesty in representation. These are not minor virtues. They are sacred reflections of divine character. Righteousness brings blessing. Treachery brings instability. A society cannot flourish when trust collapses. Humility and pride stand next in opposition. Pride walks confidently, unaware that it stands at the edge of a cliff. Pride goes before destruction. The downfall may not be immediate, but it is inevitable. Humility, however, precedes honor. To acknowledge limitation invites growth. To confess need invites guidance. In a culture that admires self-assertion, Proverbs quietly insists that true elevation begins with lowered posture. Beyond individual character, the Proverbs widen to social justice. The poor appear not as background figures, but as moral tests. To oppress the poor is to insult their maker. Bribery corrodes judgment. Injustice destabilizes communities. Righteousness exalts a nation. The health of a society depends not only on military strength or economic prosperity, but on fairness, compassion, and integrity. Wisdom refuses to separate spirituality from civic responsibility. Then, in chapter 22, the form shifts again. 30 sayings of the wise unfold in measured reflection. The voice becomes instructive once more, though less personal than before. These sayings warn against exploiting the poor, reminding readers that God defends the vulnerable. Anger is portrayed as contagious. Companionship with the hot-tempered risks adopting their ways. Emotional climate shapes moral development. Practical caution emerges in warnings against reckless pledges. To guarantee another's debt without foresight invites bondage. Wisdom encourages generosity, but not impulsive entanglement. It calls for discernment in financial commitments and relational alliances. Parenting returns as a sacred responsibility. Discipline, though uncomfortable, is framed as formative love. To withhold correction is not kindness, it is neglect. Character requires shaping, yet discipline is never cruelty. It aims at restoration and maturity. Envy is confronted as well. The apparent success of the wicked tempts comparison. Their prosperity may seem enviable, but Proverbs insists that their end is unstable. The righteous, though sometimes overlooked, possess enduring hope. Time reveals the deeper truth. Rescue and advocacy appear again. Deliver those who are being led away to death. Indifference becomes complicity. Wisdom calls for courageous intervention on behalf of the oppressed. Justice is not passive, it requires action. The familiar warning against laziness resurfaces in vivid imagery. A neglected field overgrown with thorns, a broken wall symbolizing vulnerability. The observer reflects, learning from another's decline. Poverty arrives not as a dramatic invader, but as a slow-moving intruder. Chapters 25 through 29 introduce additional proverbs compiled during the reign of Hezekiah. Generations after Solomon, scribes preserved and organized these sayings, suggesting that wisdom was valued not only as heritage, but as living guidance. Here, speech once more receives careful attention. Words fitly spoken are compared to apples of gold in settings of silver, beautiful and timely. Self-control becomes strength. One who rules his spirit is greater than one who conquers a city. Emotional restraint is portrayed as a higher form of victory. Interaction with authority is addressed. Approaching a king requires humility and caution. Self-exaltation invites humiliation. Wisdom understands hierarchy and respects order without surrendering integrity. Even enemies are considered. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread. Kindness disarms hostility and entrusts justice to God. Revenge is subtly rejected. Generosity becomes a weapon of transformation. Leadership occupies significant space. When the righteous govern, people rejoice. When the wicked rule, people groan. Authority magnifies character. A ruler's justice stabilizes a nation. Corruption erodes it. Wisdom is not confined to private virtue. It shapes public destiny. Throughout these chapters, the rhythm of contrast continues. Each proverb stands alone, yet together they weave a moral tapestry. They move from home to marketplace, from private heart to royal court. They insist that every decision, however small, participates in a larger story. The father's early plea now expands into a chorus of communal insight. The call remains consistent. Choose the path that leads to life. Guard your speech. Honor your parents. Work diligently. Practice integrity. Defend the vulnerable. Rule your emotions. Lead justly. In this steady cadence of comparison, wisdom becomes less abstract and more embodied. It enters kitchens and courts, fields and thrones. It reveals that holiness is not confined to sacred spaces. It is practiced in daily choices, measured words, honest scales, disciplined hearts. And as these proverbs accumulate, they form not merely advice, but vision. A vision of a life aligned with divine order, where reverence for God quietly shapes every relationship, every transaction, every ambition. As the final chapters of the Book of Proverbs unfold, the familiar voice of Solomon gives way to other witnesses. It is as though the scroll, having carried the wisdom of a king and the reflections of generations, now opens space for quieter, humbler voices. Men who speak not from palaces, but from deep awareness of human limitation. Chapter 30 introduces Agur. Little is known about him. He appears briefly without royal titles or grand credentials. Yet his words feel startlingly honest. If Solomon spoke with the confidence of a ruler, Agur begins with confession. Surely I am more brutish than any man. I have not learned wisdom. It is not false humility. It is the recognition that before the vastness of God, human understanding shrinks. Agur lifts his eyes toward the heavens and asks piercing questions. Who has ascended into heaven and come down? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? The questions are rhetorical, and the implied answer is clear: only God. In a book devoted to wisdom, Agur reminds us that wisdom begins not in mastery, but in awe. Human intellect, however sharp, cannot contain the infinite. Then comes one of the most tender prayers in Scripture. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me. Agur fears two extremes. In abundance, he might grow self-sufficient and deny God. In poverty, he might be tempted to steal and dishonor God's name. His request is not for status, but for balance. He desires a life where dependence remains steady, where gratitude replaces greed. This prayer quietly challenges the heart. It suggests that both scarcity and excess can distort perspective. True wealth lies not in accumulation, but in sufficiency shaped by reverence. Agur's reflections then shift into poetic numerical sayings. 3 things, even 4. The structure is rhythmic, almost meditative. 3 things are never satisfied. 4 never say enough. 3 things are too wonderful, 4 too marvelous to understand. These lists invite contemplation. They reveal patterns embedded in creation: the restless grave, the insatiable fire, the mystery of an eye. Eagle in the sky, the wonder of love between a man and a woman. Through these observations, Agur demonstrates that wisdom is attentive. It notices, it reflects, it learns from both nature and human behavior. With chapter 31, the scroll turns once more, introducing Lemuel. His words are described as an oracle taught by his mother. Once again, wisdom travels through relationship. A mother instructs a son who wears a crown. Authority does not exempt one from counsel. Her first warning is direct: avoid excess wine. Intoxication clouds judgment. For a king, impaired judgment harms not only himself, but an entire nation. Leadership demands clarity. Power amplifies consequences. A ruler must remain sober in mind and spirit. But the mother's counsel moves beyond personal restraint. She commands her son to open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Leadership is not self-protection, it is advocacy. A just king defends the poor, protects the vulnerable, and refuses bribes. Authority becomes righteous when it lifts those who cannot lift themselves. Then the chapter shifts into one of the most celebrated portraits in Scripture, the woman of noble character. This is no fragile ideal confined to beauty or charm. Her worth is described as far above jewels. She is industrious, rising while it is still night, providing food for her household. She manages resources wisely, purchases fields, plants vineyards. Strength and dignity clothe her. Her hands are active, yet her heart is generous. She extends her palm to the poor. Her speech is marked by wisdom and kindness. She fears the Lord. This is the secret beneath her strength. Charm fades, beauty passes, but reverence endures. In this portrait, wisdom takes on flesh. It is seen in work ethic, compassion, stewardship, faithfulness. The home flourishes because she lives attentively and reverently. Her children rise and call her blessed. Her husband praises her. Honor surrounds her not because she seeks it, but because she embodies virtue. As the book closes, the themes that began in chapter 1 return with clarity. First, the foundation remains unchanged. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Reverence anchors every proverb, every warning, every promise. Without it, knowledge fragments into pride or manipulation. With it, understanding aligns with truth. Second, two paths continue to stretch before humanity: the way of righteousness and the way of wickedness. From the Father's early plea to the final portrait of virtue, the contrast persists. One path brightens like the dawn, the other darkens into confusion. Every choice nudges the traveler further along one road or the other. Third, the moral law of sowing and reaping quietly governs the narrative. Diligence yields stability. Dishonesty invites ruin. Pride precedes collapse. Kindness generates honor. Though consequences may delay, they do not disappear. Character shapes destiny. Finally, personal responsibility permeates the entire book. Kings, parents, children, merchants, rulers, spouses, each stands accountable. Wisdom cannot be inherited automatically. It must be chosen. No one is forced to sit at wisdom's banquet, yet the invitation stands open. And so the scroll closes, not with spectacle, but with invitation. The voice that once said, "My son," now echoes toward every reader. Choose reverence, guard your heart, speak carefully, work diligently, lead justly, live faithfully. If this journey through Proverbs has encouraged you, consider continuing to explore these timeless words. Subscribe and follow the channel so you won't miss future reflections that unpack scripture with depth and clarity. Each episode is designed to strengthen your faith, deepen your understanding, and help you walk the path of wisdom in everyday life. Let's continue discovering together how ancient truth still speaks powerfully into our modern world.